Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
This is issue number 57, Survivor Guilt, a thematic episode, our second ever thematic episode. Thank you to Matt, our present level patron, for requesting these. Matt always comes up with some really cool ones. And so we're going to get started on that in just a second. This week's plug is a shout out to And a Bag of Chips, a podcast that is all things the late 90s, early 2000s. So basically when you and I were in high school and college, which was basically the best time of our lives. And I'd say probably the best time in human history.
Oh, right. The joys of nostalgia bias.
I freely admit that. So it's hosted by Lisa Foyles, who was on All That on Nickelodeon. And Drew, I've been a Lisa Foyles fan for years on Top 5. She hosts a number of different things. She's big with UFC in terms of like hosting back behind the scenes stuff. So and she's just super fun, and it's a really cool show. And so you can check them out. That's our podcast plug of the week. And one last thing, I just want to say once again to our fans, please be sure to fill out that listener survey. Again, we've gotten some great responses so far. We're just looking for more comments, more feedback. That's going to stay open for another couple of weeks. And then we will take all of your suggestions and plug them into what will hopefully be a better show. Hey, we spent a lot of time last week on the Reed Richards episode talking about that self-reflection and that improvement that we ask all of our listeners to do. And we want to make sure that everybody knows that we are not just hypocrites. It's not just do as we say, not as we do. We are willing to do that as well. We are willing to reflect and say, hey, this is some of the areas where you guys say, hey, the show could stand to be a little better. So that's what we're all about. So Survivor Guilt. Now this, as we did last time when we talk about sidekicks, it's going to be a little different because there's not really so much of a background that we can talk about, but we can discuss a couple of things. So first off, the notion of survivor's guilt is basically, it's sort of what it sounds like. The idea that a survivor of a traumatic event feels guilty for surviving when others have died. This was first prominently identified in the 60s and was common amongst Holocaust survivors. And it's later been identified among armed forces personnel, victims of natural disasters, and survivors of terrorist attacks. So it can take several forms. Guilt over things that they didn't do or could have done. Guilt over things that they felt that they had to do to survive. And it can be simply guilt over living when others died. And it can manifest in anxiety, depression, suicidality, nightmares, mood swings. A lot of survivor's guilt is tied in with PTSD. It's basically like a subsect of PTSD, which is sort of like a catch-all for, again, post-traumatic stress disorder. Survivor's guilt comes after the traumatic event. And so in many cases, you see that in 9/11 survivors. You see that, as I said, in military personnel, if they were, say, the victims of an ambush or a firefight, and, certain members of their squad or platoon or what have you got killed and they made it out alive. Well, I could have done something to save him. I could have saved my buddy. I could have killed the guy that killed him. I could have done something. Or, why was I the one who was saved? Why didn't they take me? Why, a lot of times if, say, a parent lives and a child dies, that's a very common thing. I know that was a big thing in the Will Smith movie, I, Robot, that the robot chose to save Will Smith instead of the child because the robot deemed that Will had a higher percentage, a life value, whatever it was, and it saved him. And Will said, I would have been willing to die, save the kid, don't save me. So in many instances, it's a very common thing. And again, I don't want to say that's a common thing, but it's a very understandable thing to feel guilt over surviving. Right. And so this has been depicted in many, many ways over the decades in comics. And so thank you to Matt for offering us the opportunity to talk about this theme a little more in depth.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. So let's dive in.
So the first one that Matt brought up was Emma Frost of the X-Men, Marvel Comics, etc., the Hellfire Club, the White Queen, as she is often known. Side note, by the way, Matt said, when saying that he wanted me to do Emma Frost amongst others in this theme, he said, I thought it would be fun for you to play a uppity British aristocrat. I always assumed Emma Frost was British. Turns out she was born and raised in Boston.
I honestly did not know that.
Nor did I until I started doing research into the character. She literally, she was like head of the Massachusetts Academy. She's very snooty. She carries that air about her of aristocracy and so on and so forth. But she's from Boston.
Huh. I don't know. There's something about the character that I completely misinterpreted then. I guess the equivalent in wrestling terms, kind of like how Triple H was considered this blue blood or whatever, and then he becomes this degenerate, and then he literally runs the company now.
Yeah. Hunter Hearst Helmsley. With the curtsy and everything.
Yep.
So Emma Frost, and this is particular, and we don't often do this, but the issues that I want to highlight, and when I say this, I mean the literal comic book issues that I want to highlight, are New X-Men 138 and 139, Astonishing X-Men Volume 3, issues 13 through 18. This is the Joss Whedon run. And then X-Men Manifest Destiny 2. So first, Jean and Emma have, Jean Grey, Phoenix, and Emma have a psychic battle after Jean discovers that Emma's been having a psychic affair with Scott, to whom Jean is married. Well, yes, Scott is absolutely a dick here, but it's not like Emma's exactly scot-free either.
Right.
Or getting off scot-free.
Well,
boom.
Yeah.
That's Mr. Miracle. That's a whole other thing.
Oh, wow. This is...
So many puns, I know. But in any case, Jean finds out about this because the Stepford Cuckoos ratted her out, actually, after one of them died, and we did the Stepford Cuckoos on a previous episode. So they say to Jean telepathically, you know what your man's been doing? Because we can read his mind, and we know what's been going on. But did you know that they haven't done anything physically, but they've been having a psychic affair? So Jean shows up and she rips Emma apart, and she drags her through her history. She drags her through every negative thing that she's done. And she makes Emma feel horrible for herself about everything that's happened. In particular, so many things that happened when she was in the Hellfire Club. She lost the Hellions.
Right.
And so she made her feel very guilty over that. Then Cassandra Nova, another character, a telepath, manipulates Emma into helping Cassandra destroy the X-Men and makes Emma, she's aware of what she's doing, but she convinces Emma that she needs to do this because she plants, it's almost like Inception. She plants the suggestion inside her brain, and she says, I have to do this. And she brings up the fact that the mutant nation of Genosha was entirely destroyed except for Emma Frost. Emma Frost was the sole survivor of the Genoshan massacre. And Emma feels horrible about this. And she says at one point during, I think that's in the Whedon run, she says, I don't belong here. I belong below. Basically that I should be dead.
Yeah.
I should be dead or I should be in hell. That I don't deserve to live after literally everybody else on the island was destroyed. Then, and this is in the X-Men Manifest Destiny issue, that even when she's headmistress of the school, she's in the good graces of the team, everybody accepts her, she still feels that she doesn't belong and that her past is going to be rubbed in her face at any moment. And at one point, she's actually she's with the rest of the team, and she snaps at them because she's convinced in her own head that they're all saying that they all hate her and that they're just waiting. And so she says, fine, why don't you just let me have it then? Why don't you just say whatever it is that you want to say to me? Because I know you hate me. And everybody goes, what the hell are you talking about?
Right.
We don't have this. But she's so guilt-ridden over her own past that eventually it's Wolverine, of all people, who helps talk her out of it. And she learns to start to forgive herself. And so it's over the course of these several issues that we see Emma, who is by no means squeaky clean as a character at all, and to say nothing of her outfit choices. But she, I think, shows an excellent job of dealing and coping with the guilt in different ways and then struggling with it. I think it is a realistic portrayal of survivor guilt insofar as it is not, I would say, one of the harder psychological issues to portray. I think it's relatively easy and straightforward to show survivor guilt as opposed to some of the other ones we've grappled with, schizophrenia, DID, et cetera, where there's a lot of Hollywoodization.
Right.
Survivor's guilt is, for what it is, very straightforward. And guilt is something that can be written very straightforward. And I think it's done very well with Emma Frost.
Well, let's start with the obvious. there are decisions that have to be made in crisis situations that are going to impact the people around you. And if you are in a leadership position, or even if you're not in a leadership position, if you're just in a position where the next decision you make is going to determine who lives and who dies, you're going to have to deal with that decision for the rest of your life. So sometimes when it comes to the changes in our emotional responses physically, so the adrenaline level starts to increase, cortisol gets turned on, and basically you go to the quote unquote fight or flight response. So in Emma's case, she is quite the fighter emotionally. And so she usually does things that she thinks is going to lead to the best result under the circumstances. And because of her own resiliency, and yes, in the comics, I know the, diamond thing, but that's not really what I'm getting at. She is going to end up more likely than not surviving things that many other people won't. And in a way, that can be a positive because it means that she can continue to develop experiences that will allow her to do better during the next crisis situation. Unfortunately, that also means that she has the opportunity to think of every possible mistake that she's ever made. And because she has the gravity of what types of things happened, like we said, life or death, it means that we can't just dismiss it. If you put on the wrong color socks and they mismatch when you go to work, that's not going to move the needle. That's not going to change anything. People might notice once or laugh or something if they're your friend or whatever. It's not going to make a big difference. If your job was to pick, for example, what the fire department was going to use for its hoses, and for whatever reason, during the last 3 or 4 firefighter battles, the hoses snapped and water sprayed where it wasn't supposed to, and therefore buildings burned down and people died, you made a choice that in theory led to a bad situation and making it worse. So survivor's guilt itself has already been well established, and Anthony did a great job describing it. But there are other points to this that really do have to come into play. You did something that may have saved a life, or you did something that didn't get the result that you wanted and someone died. That's the reality. That is something that can't just be swept under the rug just because it's inconvenient. Survivor's guilt makes it so that instead of addressing it in a way that you are able to go through the stages of loss and the stages of grief, you get stuck in one of those stages and it plays itself over and over and over. And
your mental needle gets stuck.
Yeah.
That's a reference that may go over the... I'm referring to gramophone records, pressing vinyl, although vinyl's making a comeback, so maybe they understand it.
Good point. And so you don't develop the necessary growth for how to handle the next situation. Or let's say you did everything just absolutely right, 100% perfect, and people still died because you didn't have enough resources, not because of anything you did, but simply because that's just what was there at the time. And when an entire island, by the way, islands are very vulnerable to these types of things when it comes to natural disasters and whatnot, you're not going to have everything at your disposal, even the things that you think you need. So then you're in a situation of true triage and rationing. So now your decisions are going to be multiplied more in situations where you're isolated. And that's something that Emma deals with when the whole Genosha thing happens, because as much as I'm talking about planning, so many of these situations for the victims are random chance. And humanity does not deal with random chance well. We don't process
collectively.
Yeah, we really don't process that. We have to put meaning. We have to put a system in front of something. Even if it doesn't exist, we will create it with our own minds. So you're the sole survivor of something. If you're in wrestling, that's fantastic. because you get the adulation of everyone around you. And, if you're in the Royal Rumble, you get to go to WrestleMania and challenge for the belt. But any other circumstance, most people don't like that. People want the idea that if you're in a collective and you had common goals or other things that you were working towards, you're part of the police. You want everyone to do well. You want to have that camaraderie. And that all gets removed because of things that were outside of your control.
And to bring it back to something maybe I would say a little more primal, and certainly something that's understood on a mass scale. If you are the sole survivor of something, you're blessed. You are somehow looked favorably upon by the gods or the deities or what have you. And there must be something special about you for you to have survived this. And therefore, now you have this additional responsibility or other thing foisted upon you solely by luck, but others may perceive you as somehow being blessed, lucky, or what have you, and they foist their own expectations upon you that you didn't ask for because you didn't ask to survive. You just happened to survive, but now you're the chosen one, or you were somehow lucky and or blessed.
Right, and to continue with that idea, in that case, what's your secret? How did you do it? You can't say, I just got lucky. There had to be something, and you better find it, because now it's not just you thinking, what did I do? It's everyone else wondering what you did.
And how do I get it?
Right. So now you have added expectations of others that you never anticipated. And even if it's a matter of a temporary perception, because thankfully, with the exception, the grave exception of the Holocaust, these events tend to be immediate and short-lasting, but the consequences are long. It's unfortunate when you have a situation where the actual events are long-lasting too. That's the double whammy. That's I'll be honest, I can't even imagine. I just can't.
Yeah, but the tail is long.
Yeah, and let's wrap this up. Emma went through just about every variation of this. She had it individually in her personal life, in her emotional relationships. She's had it from the societal part and belonging to a group and having that group ripped away from you. And she's had it where she's in charge of things and she knows that every decision is major because of what she's been through. And she automatically, in her case, tends towards the negativistic thinking. So it's hard to imagine a person having all of these variations and not coming away with the idea that I'm screwed up in some way. I know people may think it's a blessing, or I know that some people think this is good, but I can't imagine thinking this is good. And anybody that even comes close to challenging me on this, they're in for a rude awakening.
Yeah. So now moving on from Emma Frost to someone else, another master of mutant abilities and so on and so forth. And we talked about Emma having the psychic affair with Scott. Let's talk Scott Summers. And we did the whole episode on Scott, but I don't believe so much that this really was addressed in so much in his episode. But after Avengers versus X-Men, he feels incredible guilt. Now, he killed Xavier, but because he was under the power of the Phoenix Force, that he felt that he had to do it because Xavier was trying to stop him. And he feels incredible guilt over this. Now he's on a suicide mission, essentially, to redeem himself. And that's what a lot of the aftermath of Avengers versus X-Men is, because now he aligns with Magneto and Scott goes a little hardline in this because he feels that he has to redeem himself for something that he did. But he still has survivor's guilt over killing Charles. That's an interesting spin on it and is not something that Emma has to deal with so much, because Emma, for all of the things that she's involved with, was never directly responsible for a lot of those, that she may blame herself for some of those things, but she didn't outright do them nearly on the level that Scott did when he killed Xavier. And then Scott ends up feeling guilty about that. So that's an interesting twist. And I guess the other side of the coin, maybe, from Emma.
Well, to relate it to things outside of comics, let's go to close relationships where, let's say you have a loved one, a family member or boyfriend, girlfriend, whoever, And I've actually seen this in the ER where the other person is attacked while they were under the influence. So in other words, there was alcohol or other substances involved. And the aftermath of what has come of that is either the loss of the relationship or a severe injury or even death of the other person. So this is a situation where you know that you weren't in your best condition. And in that way, you can say it's not your fault, but unfortunately, it's now your problem because the consequences are permanent. Even if it's not the matter of death, it can be just that the relationship is never going to be the same. It's fractured. In those situations, you now have the ultimate balancing act. You have to, on one hand, find the ability and the grace to forgive yourself because no one's infallible, while at the same time be willing to acknowledge that this was a bad thing that you had a direct role in. In other words, there's no such thing as absolution, at least not from an emotional standpoint. Doing that is the akin to trying to create amnesia. And at least in my clinical experience, that hasn't worked well either, because there's no such thing as that type of selective amnesia. If you're blocking something out that is that harmful, that traumatic, it's usually to the detriment of that entire timeline, like that entire experience. You don't get to just say, oh, well, I want to forget that I killed Xavier, so I'm going to get someone to just erase that one memory. Like, it doesn't really work that way in real life. You're going to usually forget a lot of things in that time period, as well as other really important factors that are going to really mess up your mind anyway. So no such thing. You're dealing with this head on. And the way Scott deals with it is trying the ultimate penance. And that is actually very common to survivor's guilt. The idea that even if you can't reverse the thing that was so traumatic and so wrong and so horrible, you can do something similar to feel like you're reversing it. It's just that you have to keep doing it over and over and over again until you collapse, until you've expended all of your energy and effort. And some people do get some level of relief with that, not many. So I wouldn't advocate someone doing things that way. You mentioned it's like a suicide mission. I'll just go ahead and say it. For some people, it is just flat out suicide. That's why often when it comes to things that are instant in terms of their destructive nature, after all, how would Scott be able to kill someone that's as powerful, a telepath or whatever you want to call it as Xavier? Well, I mean, you just have to look in his eyes. Don't look in his eyes.
Yeah.
But the point is, I'm going to take it to something that's a little more real, and I'm not trying to be controversial here. When it comes to these types of decisions that lead to permanent consequences and death, as regular human beings, we have that in our daily lives, and those are guns. And when that happens, when people, I gave the example of substances, and that's actually a very pertinent example. The number of people that I've seen brought to the emergency room because they were under the influence, and even if they were making statements about life not being worth it, or they were making horrible choices and they shouldn't be around anymore, or people be better off without them, I'm grateful that most of the time people sober up and say, well, I'm not in that mindset now because I got my head clear. Scott, obviously, under the influence of the Phoenix Force, doesn't get the immediate opportunity to say that. But more importantly, he had the weapon, and he had it right there. And when you're under the influence and you have a weapon right there, that's when tragedies happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't get a second chance usually to make that type of impulsive decision.
No,
and
you don't.
So
such a high percentage of gun deaths in this country are suicide.
Right. And once again, I'm not trying to get political here. That's not the point of this. It's literally just the information, okay? So that's what I equate this with someone like Scott, where if something like that happened and someone got hurt, may not even result in death, but anything like that, the person usually does everything they can to find some sort of release, just some sort of way to get this memory out of their head. And the ways that people usually try and do it are not the healthiest. So in this case, Scott is just putting his life on the line constantly because there's no other way he thinks it'll get better. And unfortunately, some people go a completely different route. But either variation is not healthy. And more importantly to all of this, if you're having survivor's guilt, find other survivors and don't do this alone. So, that's the one takeaway that I got with Scott and how he was dealing with this after. Also the mentorship, the fact that it was someone that he respected for so long.
Yeah. And we did discuss that in the Scott episode. Yeah. So now going to sort of riffing off your comment, find other survivors. Our next character, historically, again, with some tweaks to the background and the story, our next character has no other survivors that they can turn to because we're discussing the last son of Krypton, Superman.
Hey, there have been other Kryptonians.
Yes,
just because he didn't know it at the time. I'm kidding.
But by and large, and I know that Supergirl has dealt with a lot of this as well, and so on and so forth. Yeah. But for the most part, a lot of this is baked into Superman as a character. Now, obviously, and we've discussed that Superman is not a character that we could ever really do because he's Superman. He is the big blue Boy Scout. He is the ultimate good. But he does carry that with him. The notion that he was not around to try and save that. And depending on the stories, we've seen where he tries to go back and try and save Krypton. In the Superman Returns movie, he had left Earth to try and go see if whatever he could find remnants of the planet, whether it was the bottled city of Kandor, because he tried to save them. So there are moments and there are storylines throughout Superman's many, many year history where he has tried to save whatever remnants of Krypton that he can, because that is his home, because that is where he is from. And although he loves Earth and the Earth is under his protection and he considers himself very much of Earth, he is not of Earth. He may be of Earth, but he is from Krypton.
That's a matter of identity. And that was taken away from him from the very start. So at that point, if you are an orphan, if you've been in a situation where people ask you where you're from or what is it that you do with, or your relationship with your parents, or just the basic conversations that you're supposed to have with people. Superman was blessed with the Kents, but still, it's not quite the same. And the idea that you can't have that basic connection that other people are able to relate to because of circumstances that not just are beyond your control, but are beyond your near existence. You almost weren't here because of not just random things happening on a planet, but the planet itself being gone. That's just a magnitude that I don't think I comprehend really, but it still stands. People that have been immigrants from other locations that had to come by themselves and leave their family because of traumatic situations in their home country, be it war, famine. To be honest, that's a lot of what we're in the United States. That's a lot of what this country is based off of. So I think a lot of people can relate to that part of it, just not to that extreme anymore. Although, once again, there are plenty of people that
we are seeing this. We are seeing this in this day and age in 2019. We are seeing folks that are fleeing, that are trying to do what it is that they can to survive.
Yeah, and in those circumstances, at least you're usually seeing. Well, actually, I just realized it does still relate to Superman, because why did he survive? It wasn't as random as, well, he's the only one left. His father was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice and say, someone has to continue with this, so you go. In other words, if the parents of a child say, you need a better life, you need to get somewhere else, we're going to go ahead and use our life savings and we're going to send you to another location just so that you can have everything that we didn't. And some of those people don't even get to see their parents ever again physically, let alone talk to them or have that type of relationship. And they were willing to sacrifice that. When people make a known sacrifice of their own well-being for you, and you don't ever get the chance to reciprocate in some way, that's heavy. That's painful.
Yeah.
Now,
I hadn't really considered that it is very similar to the immigrant story that we saw so often in the 30s. Now, another character, because we did Marvel back to back, now compare and contrast Superman with the Caped Crusader, the Dark Knight, saw his parents gunned down in front of him, and guilt that he carries with him for not being able to save them. That is so much a part of who Batman is as a character, that he does everything that he does to prevent some other child from seeing their parents gunned down in front of them. It is an incredible driving force. I would say it's very similar to what Superman does, but obviously they do it in very different ways. But Batman, a lot to unpack there. And I know we've said repeatedly that we will eventually get around to a Batman episode. We may have to do a 2-parter on that because a lot to unpack with Bruce.
Okay. So let's also point out that there were multiple losses at once in that moment when his parents are gunned down. Yes, he loses his biological parents, but there's way more that he lost. He lost a sense of innocence that he'll never get back. Children are not supposed to, in my opinion, and I know some people may think differently, children at that young age are not supposed to have to experience massive trauma.
No, they should not.
But also, he had a lot of privilege at the time. It's not as if he had want for anything in life when it comes to finances at that point. His parents were well off. And I'm not begrudging them that. I think that's fine. It's great when people are in those circumstances. Wonderful. Do the best you can. Great. But it still becomes a massive transition when you go from that to now you're going to have to grow up really quick because you're going to be in charge of all of this. And so although we have a negative stereotype towards people that get massive inheritances, however they get it, at the same time, there is a huge amount of anxiety and pressure that gets created when something unexpected happens and it's foisted upon you prematurely. Now, he wasn't running the show at that age, obviously, because there are other adults, but still, knowing that pretty much it's all on you. Everything regarding corporations, regarding trust funds, regarding just about all of the major events happening in Gotham are going to revolve around you from that sphere, that, circumstance. And the people that were supposed to guide you can't do it. All because of that one event. That's a little more than a child that young should have to endure. Then you add the venue and the circumstances that they were in. This isn't a situation where they were running from a fire or they were in the middle of a war zone or anything like that. It was just to enjoy a show. It was just meant to be one of those positive moments in life where the family's supposed to get a little closer and have a stronger bond because you're doing something that's considered entertainment and a common interest. It's the thing that we all strive to have, those moments that really make life worth it. And it's gone. So you get the juxtaposition of so many different aspects of your life that appear to be on this positive trajectory, literally on rails to just go as far and as high as it possibly can. And you get the rail snapped, the car on fire, everything descending, and the only thing left now is to pick up the pieces or the pearls. All at a young age when, in theory, you're helpless and defenseless. I don't even know what to say. That's the type of thing where if you don't do something in the moment, you'll end up doing nothing for the rest of your life. So in a way, I'm going to say I'm grateful that Batman ultimately chose to do something.
That he does.
I mean, you already said it. We could do this for way longer. And I literally just stopped myself mid thought because I realized we gotta keep moving.
Yeah. So the last character that we're going to discuss is Rick Grimes, who is the only Walking Dead character, the only major Walking Dead character of the three that we had the listener poll that we haven't covered. We never got around to doing Rick. We did the governor and we did Negan, but we never got around to Rick. So and now that Rick is dead, spoiler alert in the comics, and The Walking Dead is over, we'll get around to Rick Grimes one of these days. But
or we won't. I'll be honest. I've never been that big on Rick. I'm not. I mean, I don't dislike him. I'm just saying.
Well, I feel like Brian will want him one of these days. So we're going to end up doing Rick Grimes one way or another. But Rick feels guilty abandoning about the fact that Lori and Judith were murdered by the governor's crew and that he couldn't do anything to save them. And that he had to abandon them and not make sure that they didn't turn because they were under attack and he had to survive and he had to protect Carl.
Yeah, this is the primal version of what many people would think of with survivor's guilt, because although the circumstances clearly are based on random chance, you don't expect a zombie apocalypse. And of course, the trauma involved in terms of the violence and humanity creating these factions and just self-destructing left and right. None of that is under Rick's control. That's understandable. The reason I'm saying it's the most germane form of survivor's guilt is because we always think of the human fight or flight response. Rick actively chose flight. He ran. He wanted to survive. And to do that, he had to get himself out of the situation. That is a very primal response. And there is nothing wrong with that. The consequence that other people are also dying left and right because they weren't able to exercise that same option is incredibly unfortunate. And Rick knows it. He knows that in theory, he could stay, but he has to now use the one avenue that he has. And ultimately, as we saw throughout the comics, he took advantage of the opportunities that were in front of him at any given time to make sure that, darn it, he's going to use that standard trope. When the oxygen mask deployed, he made sure he put his on before anybody else's, but he still helped a lot of people. It's not as if he did it out of spite, out of anger, out of any malice towards the people that died. But in general, if you have a choice between saving yourself and saving someone else, the default is to save yourself. That doesn't make it less painful. Really doesn't. Because we've developed such a hierarchy of knowing that in the long run of existence, we need multiple people. But in that short-term period, one is better than none. So I'm saying this because I don't know what the percentage is. I don't know how many people run in those circumstances versus stay and fight or try and do something else. I don't know. What I want to say to listeners right now, because I'm sure people have been in these circumstances and they may have similar responses to, I'll relate it to something that I think has happened to just about anybody that has experience in a society that has cars. You're driving down on a highway, you see a car that is what looks to be totaled, really mangled. EMTs haven't arrived on the scene, or you don't see police or ambulances or anything like that. You don't know what the circumstances are. I'm asking this to Anthony, but I'm also asking it to our audience. How many times have you pulled over?
I have not pulled over only because I've never been in that situation. But if I were, I would say it would have to be on a case-by-case basis, because it depends on if I'm going somewhere where I can afford to take the time away. Is it something, where I'm in a rush myself? I will call 911. I will report it. I will at least do that. Even if I can't stay, I mean, even if I am pulling over, I will still call 911. But if at the very minimum, I will say, hey, I just passed, I'm on 195 eastbound, mile marker, whatever. And I saw a car mangled and whatever. You need to send somebody out there to check on them. So I won't say that I will do nothing, but I can't say guaranteed. I would like to say that I will be able to pull over. It would have to be a situation where I have something personally that I need to get done immediately in that time frame. But if I'm like driving to work and I see that, I'll go to, I'm not in a time constraint to get to work. Believe me, I'm never in a time constraint to get to work. I just went back to work this week. Okay. I'm really not in any rush to.
Okay. And I'm not saying that to call anybody out or to call myself out, because I'll give my honest answer, which is I have no idea. I don't have a clue. I know that I've been in circumstances outside of a car where I've had the opportunity to at least stop and see what's going on and check on a situation outside of a hospital setting. But I've never stopped on the highway. And I've actually seen cars on fire. And in that circumstance, I remember driving by and just saying, well, I don't want to get too close. I don't want my car to catch on fire because I don't want an explosion and I don't want to make things worse. So I was going with the rationalization that I was mitigating extra damage and extra risk. But later on, I reflected on it and I said to myself, is that accurate? Are you just a coward? I actually said that to myself. And I realized that's not always a healthy way to deal with it. If it motivates me to take the time to act in a good Samaritan way, then it can be a positive. But if it's simply just becoming negative, that any opportunity that you don't do something is automatically a failure and makes you a worse person, that type of negative feedback and negative self-talk can be incredibly damaging. So to bring it right back to Rick, the fact that he continued to be the type of leader that wanted to have as many people survive as possible, but recognized that at moments he couldn't do everything. And so he had to make the best decision with whatever information he could and still continue that mindset, I think ultimately is a positive. But that doesn't make it easier to sleep at night when, in theory, if he had the experience of how to deal with these situations and somehow go back in time and deal with it again, maybe he does something that's beneficial. But no, can't dwell on it, can't change the past, can't do any of those things. You can reflect, you can mourn for the people that have suffered and have died, but beyond that, it can become incredibly detrimental.
Fair enough. So we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll discuss potential treatment options in, I guess, a non-specific fashion. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Hey, my name's Paul, and I'm not an animal expert.
I'm Donna, and I'm not an animal expert either.
And together we do a podcast about animals called Varmints.
Every week we pick an animal, do a bunch of research on it, and bring you some interesting facts about that animal.
But we don't stop there. We talk about that animal in movies, TV, and other pop culture.
And we talk about whether or not that animal would make a tasty dish, and how intelligent we think it is on the scale of 1 to 10.
It's exactly like one of those fancy PBS nature documentaries.
Except with more poo jokes.
New episodes go live every Thursday wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
Or you can visit us at blazingcariboustudios.com.
Varmints! Varmints!
Hey podcast fans, I'm Rachel, host of We're All Mad Here, a new podcast about the history of mental health. Do you love history? Do you love creepy stories of abandoned hospitals? How about questionable medical procedures? We're covering it all. Not only will we sneak around in old asylums, we'll talk about the patients that stayed there and what their lives were like. We're covering disorders, cures, and living life with mental illness. So come join us on We're All Mad Here at allmadpod.com. because the history of mental illness is insane.
Hi, I'm Erica Schultz, and this is Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling.
And we're back. So since this is a thematic episode, I just want to go over, I guess, some general things. Let's start, I guess, with Emma, because I think we spoke a lot about Emma, and since Matt was the one who really said that was one of the major characters that he wanted to talk about. What would you say to Emma in the situation, discussing some of the guilt that she feels over the Genosha incident, everything going on with the Hellions, the fact that she feels almost imposter syndrome over her connection to the rest of the X-Men and so on and so forth. How do you get her to alleviate that and forgive herself for some of the things that she's been associated with and maybe not even directly done herself?
Similar to people that have been in a service industry or I specifically mean public service, but it could be almost anything. The first thing I say is thank you, because it's clear that many times people are either placed in situations that they didn't want to be in, or they're willing to be helpful in situations that a lot of people don't even want to tackle. So showing that level of gratitude that you're willing to take that risk, you're willing to take that responsibility, that chance, it can start to open the door to allowing that person, as you said, to start that self-satisfaction and healing that's necessary after so many traumatic experiences. After that, it becomes a bit more pragmatic. Finding out what the person particularly focuses on. It doesn't have to be as to the far of PTSD with specific nightmares or flashbacks, but if it is, yeah, you deal with those individually. But it can also just be this general feel of what is it that you wish you could have done, or what is it that you wish you could have changed? And once the person reveals what that is, you can say to them, what can you do now that comes closest to honoring that thought? Because clearly, if people have died, you're not bringing them back. But that doesn't mean you can't allow their memory to live on. And you can't do something if it's a matter of people being just as heroic as you or whatever, and it was just random chance that they died and you survived. Then do you have any pictures? Do you have video? Do you have things that you don't personally have to dwell on, but you can at least get out in some way to let people know that they were important? Because often, you already mentioned it, that the person that survives almost gets elevated to this level that they feel like they shouldn't be at. And if you can honor the dead or honor the suffering and say, these people are just as important as me, and I'm the one that's showing it, it allows that grace that says, now I'm at the level I'm supposed to be because I'm with them. I may not be with their, physically they're not there with me, but spiritually, or whatever you want to call it, emotionally, now I'm demonstrating the plane that we're on. And if you can have them do that in a way, because clearly people don't all have the same resources. I'm not saying everybody's going to be able to start a foundation, but just whatever little things that they can do to keep those humanistic memories, because often it just gets relegated to just the violence, the end of it, the gore, the things that obviously are graphic and disturbing for the person. Even if it's not blood, I mean, it can just be the fact that you see someone dead and their eyes were still open. Whatever it is, allowing them to have that transition that, yes, that did happen, but so did the rest of their lives. And so did the other things that they did that that were positive. So go ahead and make that the forefront rather than all of the negative. If you can help them ease that transition, and I think Emma can do that, then I think she'd be a great and honestly, in the comics, it's been demonstrated she's able to do it. And she just sometimes needs that outside guidance to remind her that that's what she's capable of.
Fair point. And I think those are all very real things that our listeners and that we in general in the real world, in the non-comics world, can do. Even if it's slightly outside the realm of survivor guilt, just the notion that I think all of us understand and experience loss, and whether it's guilt or other negative feelings that may be associated with the fact that we're still here, that simple act of honoring their memory, I think, is very powerful. And if you can carry that forward into a positive and use that as something to say that these people or this individual did not die in vain, that something good can come of it. I'm of the mindset that there's always a silver lining somewhere. It may not be easy to find. You may have to dig through a lot of stuff to find it, but there is always a silver lining somewhere. And if you are able to do that, then that, as you said, elevates you to that level to where you feel, okay, then that guilt comes off your shoulders, or at least gets lifted, so it's not as heavy. I'm not going to be so bold as to say it will ever go away, but I think it's something that you may be able to carry with you.
Yeah. And I want to transition a little bit to the other characters and how it's been demonstrated in comics. It hasn't been portrayed in the way I'm going to describe it, but I think does the same thing. Superman's Fortress of Solitude. It's usually pointed out as his haven away from the rest of the world because that's a heavy weight in and of itself. But also in some of the original Superman movies and in different variations in comics and cartoons, it also is an homage to Krypton. There's many artifacts, there's the technology, there's quote unquote video, whatever you want to call it, of his parents and of things that were on Krypton, so that even though he may not have directly experienced them as a child, he can at least learn about his own culture and background. And in real life, that is something that can be done. If you are from a culture that you felt like you never experienced because your parents gave you a better life, and in the end, you weren't able to have a relationship with them, that doesn't mean that you can't learn more about that culture. That doesn't mean that you can't ingratiate yourself with, for example, an ethnic society that is going to allow you to have similar experiences. So that's another variation of it. If you're in a situation where you do have the means, you can actually do things that are much more concrete in terms of if someone died from, let's say, a tragic event, and you want a memorial for them, and you have the ability to pay for that, and you can do something like that. Batman would have those types of means. So there's so many different ways to go about handling that level of loss. And if you feel some level of guilt that you're one of the ones left, that's okay. And I'm not ever going to say that will, quote unquote, go away. It doesn't have to, because memories last. And it's all right, because if it weren't for that, then we wouldn't be able to learn and we wouldn't be able to grow. And although it's unfortunate that some people end up carrying these heavy bags, it also means that they're getting stronger and they're growing things on basically the shoulders of people that also dealt with it before them. And if it's atrocities, then you have the opportunity to, in theory, help prevent ones that, if they're man-made, and I'm talking about war, I'm talking about genocide, I'm talking about things like that, you actually can be one of the people that lets those that think you shouldn't exist, let them know that you're worth something, that you're truly valuable, way more than they ever realized. People that have fought for justice, I'm not talking comics, people that do that, that's a huge motivating factor. And instead, they could have thought they had survivor's guilt because they were one of the few that, let's say, if we're going back to the U.S., I apologize, I'm gonna go there. If you're the product of people that weren't considered people in this country, and you know that in theory there should be a lot more of you, but there aren't for obvious reasons, and you know that if you try and go back in your lineage, you can't even find most of them because they weren't meant to be found. But you know that overall, thanks to people that wouldn't stop caring and knew that at some point things were going to get better, your very existence is dependent on that. Don't have time for survivor's guilt with that. Don't have time to complain.
That's incredibly powerful. And I have nothing else even to say to that. Yeah.
It was true with the Holocaust. It's true in parts of Africa. And it was true for a couple of 100 years right where we live.
Mm-hmm. True story. So I think, I don't think we can top that. So I'm not even going to attempt to it. So let's just wrap things up then. So next episode is we're going to be talking Clint Barton, Hawkeye, specifically the Matt Fraction run. That is at the request of Ruby. And then Ariel has requested Roy Harper. So hats off to Roy Harper. It's a very obscure Led Zeppelin reference. Yeah, let's see who gets that. And we're Archer week, our Archer month back to back. And then it's going to be time for New York Comic Con. And I will be there. And we are working on getting some interviews with creators. And there will be something from New York Comic Con. I'm not exactly sure what, because it's all obviously dependent on who I can talk to, but there will be creator interviews. There will be character discussions, and I will find some way to mash all that up into some fun episodes, and we will get that together. We're also going to be having, at some point in October, a live episode where we'll be announcing the date for that soon. That will be our first ever live recorded episode, and that will be at Rogue Comics in Cranford, New Jersey. So if you're in the area, once we announce the date, stop by. You can meet Doc and myself and ask some questions. I don't know exactly, again, which episode we'll be doing, but it's going to be a lot of fun. The listener survey, we're still asking for input on that. That's going on for a couple more weeks. So check out our website. It's in the show notes. It'll be on social media. Check that out. Please leave us some constructive criticism so we can make the show better for you. Join our Discord. It's tinyurl.com/Capes Discord, capital C, capital D. And you can join and you can have a discussion with some other fans of the show. And we got a lot of cool stuff. You can listen in as we live stream these recording sessions. Our website is capesonthecouch.live. Our Patreon is patreon.com/capesonthecouch, and you can subscribe and help support the show. We have a TeePublic. If you go on TeePublic and search for Capes on the Couch, you can buy some cool swag with our logo on it. And you can find us, as always, on social media at Capes on the Couch. And if you listen to us on a platform that allows you to like, rate, and review, please do so, because that helps more people find the show. Doc, I'd ask if there's anything else you want to say, but I think you basically said it all. I don't know how else we can top that.
Not a chance.
Yeah. And I am grateful that you are here. And I'm grateful that somewhere along the line, someone fought that your ancestors could be free so that you could be sitting here with me recording this show and have been a part of my life for the better part of, 20 years. So I'm grateful to those folks who came before us.
I'm always grateful to people who are willing to fight for life. That's all it comes down to.
Absolutely. Can't say it any better than that. So for Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.